A 75-year-old lady, with white hair and weakened by the lack of her heart medication, arrives at her son's mansion and begs for some money to buy them. The man, taken by an unexpected fury, considers it an outrage for someone who dedicated her whole life to him to dare ask. In a cruel act, he takes his mother to a scorching desert, restrains her without explanation, and abandons her there under the relentless sun. As she suffers and cries for help, he flees, leaving her at the mercy of the vast, arid expanse. Then, a majestic white horse appears on the horizon, silent witness to this injustice, and acts in a way that will shock everyone. The blazing midday sun turned every grain of sand into a tiny, burning ember, as Hope Santos felt the rough ropes bite into her wrinkled skin against the lonely, parched tree trunk. At 75, she never imagined ending up like this, abandoned in the heart of the Sonoran desert by the very son she had once carried in her womb and raised with such love. "That's for you to learn not to bother me with your pathetic needs again." Robert, her only child, still heard his cruel words echoing in her mind. The millionaire businessman had left hours ago, leaving only the dust trail of his high-end pickup truck and the deafening silence of the desert as company for the mother who had raised him alone. Hope's tears evaporated before they even touched her parched cheeks. She tried to comprehend how she had reached this moment. It had all started with a simple request, almost a whispered, embarrassed plea over the phone. "Son, I need help buying my heart medication. The doctor said it's vital." Robert's reply had been a chilling silence, followed by words that cut deeper than any knife. "Mom, you don't understand. My partner's comment on my unnecessary expenses. Your dependence is hurting my business image. It's time for you to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." Hope closed her eyes, remembering the sacrifices she had made. She had sold the family home, worked double shifts as a seamstress and cleaner, given up her own social life to ensure Robert had the best education. Every last cent of her modest inheritance had been invested in her son's studies. Every one of her dreams transformed into an opportunity for him. The biting wind carried grains of sand, like tears from the very earth, lashing her face and making her cough. Her heart condition, already weakened by the lack of medication she couldn't afford, worsened with each passing hour under the relentless sun. Her hands, once skilled with needle and thread, now trembled uncontrollably as she tried to loosen the ropes that bound her. "Lord, why do you allow this?" she murmured, her hoarse voice echoing in the void. Even in her pain, her faith remained unshaken, like a distant beacon in the storm of despair that consumed her. The irony of the situation did not escape her insight, sharpened by years of wisdom. Robert had grown up listening to her stories about compassion, about the importance of caring for the most vulnerable. She had taught him that true wealth lay in relationships, in shared love, in the generosity of the heart. Where had she gone wrong? On the distant horizon, something caught her eye. A white speck moved against the relentless blue of the sky. Hope blinked several times, thinking it a mirage caused by dehydration, but no, there was something there. A magnificent horse, white as the clouds that hadn't visited that arid region in months. The animal seemed to hesitate for a moment, its alert ears picking up the muffled groans of pain she tried to suppress. Its intelligent eyes shone with a comprehension that transcended the barrier between species. It was as if the horse could see directly into her afflicted soul. Hope felt a strange peace invade her. Perhaps she wasn't completely alone in that cruel desert. Perhaps there was still goodness in the world, even when cruelty seemed to reign supreme. The horse took a step towards her, then another, its hooves creating a mesmerizing rhythm against the hot sand. "Come, my angel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If you are to be my last companion on this earth, let it be you, pure and noble creature." The white horse continued to approach, and Hope closed her eyes. preparing to discover if this encounter would be the beginning of a miracle or simply an illusion of her tired mind before the inevitable end. The white horse approached with surprising delicacy, as if it perfectly understood Hope's fragile state. Its steps were calculated, avoiding raising too much sand that might bother the tied woman. When it finally came close enough, the animal did something extraordinary. It positioned its large, muscular body to create a protective shadow over her. "My God," Hope murmured, feeling relief from the scorching heat for the first time in hours. "You understand, don't you? You know I need help." The horse lowered its majestic head, its brown eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her shiver. There was something profoundly human in that gaze, a compassion her own son had never shown. The animal's nostrils flared as it delicately sniffed the air around her, as if assessing her health. Hope tried again to free herself from the ropes, but her strength was quickly fading. Dehydration was beginning to take its toll, and her heart condition made every movement a painful struggle. The horse seemed to perceive her anguish, emitting a low, soft whinny, almost like a lullaby. "Where did you come from, my angel?" she asked, her voice growing weaker. "Is someone looking for you?" As if answering the question, the horse turned its head in the direction from which it had come, beyond the golden dunes that stretched to the horizon. Its ears moved nervously, picking up sounds Hope could not hear. There was restlessness in its movements, as if it knew it should be somewhere else, but could not abandon her. The sun continued its relentless march across the sky, and even with the shade offered by the horse, Hope felt her mouth dangerously parched. It was then that something happened she would never forget for the rest of her life. The animal began to dig a small depression in the sand with its hooves near a rock, where a few drops of morning dew still resisted the heat. "Are you trying to help me find water?" she whispered, moved to tears. The horse continued its patient work, and soon small drops of moisture began to accumulate in the depression it had created. With careful movements, it lowered its muzzle and managed to create a small amount of clean water, which it then delicately pushed towards her with its nose. Hope stretched her neck as far as she could, her tears now flowing freely. She managed to wet her lips with a few precious drops, feeling life partially return to her dehydrated body. "Thank you," she murmured. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart." For the next few hours, the horse remained faithfully by her side, alternating between offering shade and searching for more sources of moisture. When the night wind began to blow, bringing with it the biting cold of the desert, the animal lay down next to her, sharing the warmth of its large body. Hope used those moments of relative calm to reflect on her life. She thought of all the times she had been generous, all the times she had helped needy neighbors, how she had raised Robert with values he had apparently completely forgotten. Or perhaps, she thought, kindness returns to us in unexpected ways. The horse remained vigilant throughout the night, its ears attentive to any sound that might indicate danger or salvation. Occasionally, it would stand up and look fixedly in the direction from which it had come, as if fighting an internal battle between staying and leaving. When the first lights of dawn began to tint the sky pink and gold, the horse made a decision that would change everything. It approached Hope one last time, gently touched her forehead with its muzzle in a gesture of farewell, and then ran off in the direction of the distant hills. "Don't leave me," she cried with the little voice she had left. "Please, don't abandon me too." But the horse had already disappeared beyond the dunes, leaving only its hoofprints in the sand and the desperate hope that it would return with the help she so desperately needed. 15 miles away, John Riley woke before dawn with a strange feeling in his chest. At 60, the retired rancher had developed a keen intuition over the decades that rarely failed him. Something was wrong with Storm, his white horse, his faithful companion for the past 8 years. "Mary," he called softly, touching his wife's shoulder. "Storm didn't come back last night. He's never stayed out this long before." Mary Helen, a retired nurse with graying hair and kind eyes, sat up in bed with immediate concern. She knew the special bond between her husband and the horse, a connection that transcended the common relationship between man and animal. "Since when did he leave?" she asked, already getting up to make coffee. "Early yesterday morning, galloped off like he heard something we didn't," John replied, putting on his work clothes with worried movements. "You know how sensitive he is. Remember when he found that family of injured rabbits in the pasture?" Mary smiled tenderly at the memory. Storm had an inexplicable gift for detecting suffering, whether in animals or people. That was how he had come to them years ago, appearing wounded and scared on the property after escaping abuse. John had cared for him with infinite patience, and since then the animal had shown a loyalty and intelligence that impressed everyone who knew them. "Maybe he's helping someone again," Mary suggested, pouring the strong coffee John enjoyed so much. "Remember that time he led us to Mrs. Carmen when she fell in her yard?" John nodded, but his concern did not lessen. Something in his simple, hard-working heart, hardened by decades of toil under the sun, told him this time was different. He had built his small ranch with his own hands, raised cattle, cultivated the arid land until it produced, always guided by a simple philosophy: help those in need, protect those who cannot defend themselves. "I'm going to look for him," he decided, putting on the worn leather hat that had accompanied him for 20 years. "I'll take the truck to cover more ground." Mary held his hand affectionately. "Be careful. The desert can be treacherous, especially with this heat." She knew her husband well enough to know that trying to dissuade him would be useless. John Riley was a man of his word and heart, incapable of abandoning those who depended on him. The rancher spent the morning traversing familiar trails, calling for the horse, following tracks that disappeared into the soft sand. The sun climbed relentlessly, turning the air into heat waves that distorted his vision. Several times, John stopped the vehicle to listen, hoping to hear the familiar whinny that didn't come. It was when he decided to expand his search beyond his usual territory that something caught his attention. Horse tracks, clear in the firmer sand near a rocky outcrop, following a direction he had never seen Storm take. They were hurried tracks from an animal with a definite purpose. "What were you doing out there, old friend?" John murmured, following the trail with growing concern. The tracks led towards the most arid and desolate region of the desert, a place where there was rarely a reason to go. John knew every rock, every lonely tree in that vastness, but he never imagined his horse could have reason to venture so far. As he advanced, a sense of urgency grew in his chest. The silence of the desert seemed heavier than usual, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. John accelerated the truck, raising a cloud of dust that marked his path like a desperate prayer. In the distance, silhouetted against the intense blue sky, the familiar outline of a solitary tree appeared on the horizon. It was a known landmark, but it was in a region where no one had reason to be. John felt his heart quicken when he noticed something white moving near the tree. "Storm!" he shouted, but the wind carried his voice away. What John couldn't imagine was that he was about to discover a situation that would test all his values of justice and compassion, and would forever change the life of a woman he didn't even know yet. John Riley stomped on the accelerator when he recognized Storm's silhouette near the solitary tree. The horse was galloping in tight circles, a behavior the rancher had never witnessed before. Its desperate whinnies echoed through the desert, creating a symphony of anguish that made John's heart pound. "What happened, old boy?" he murmured, stopping the truck a few yards away. It was then that he saw something that made him gasp, a human figure tied to the tree trunk, as motionless as an abandoned doll. John ran, his 60 years forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Getting closer, he found an elderly woman, her clothes torn, skin sunburnt, lips cracked from dehydration. Her hands were wounded by the ropes, and she was breathing irregularly, clearly in critical condition. Ma'am, can you hear me?" John knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he sought a pulse at her neck. It was weak, but there was life there. Storm approached, gently touching the woman's head with his muzzle, as if to say, "You're here. Now save her." "My God, who did this to you?" John began to untie the ropes carefully, noticing how tight they were and how they had cut into the delicate skin. His indignation grew with each second. In over 6 decades of living in the country, he had never witnessed such extreme cruelty against a defenseless person. Hope slowly opened her eyes, her blurred vision trying to focus on the bearded, kind face leaning over her. "The horse," she murmured hoarsely. "He came back, brought help." "Yes, ma'am. Storm brought me here. My name is John Riley. I'm going to get you out of here right now," he said, his voice filled with compassion and determination. Carefully, he freed her from the ropes and lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she was, as fragile as a wounded bird. "My son," she whispered, tears mixing with the sand on her face. "My own son brought me here." John felt a wave of shock and revulsion ripple through his body. "Your son did this?" he asked, barely able to believe what he was hearing. The answer came in a weak nod of her head, followed by choked sobs that broke the rancher's heart. With extremely careful movements, John carried Hope to his truck, Storm following alongside like a protective guardian. "Mary will take care of you. She's a nurse. She knows exactly what to do," he said, trying to comfort the woman trembling in his arms. During the drive back, John observed his passenger's worrying state in the rearview mirror. Hope drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering disconnected words about medication, about wasted love, about how she had failed as a mother. Every word was like a dagger in the heart of the simple man who had dedicated his life to caring for others. "Robert," she whispered, "why, my son? What did I do wrong?" John sped up, creating a cloud of dust that marked his race against time. Storm ran alongside the truck, his muscles working in perfect synchronicity, as if he understood the urgency of the situation. The animal who had spent hours protecting the woman now escorted her rescue. "Hold on tight, ma'am," John kept saying, his steady voice masking the despair he felt. "My Mary will have you on your feet in no time. She's handled much worse cases than this." As they approached the property, John honked repeatedly, a signal Mary knew well. Medical emergency. He had used that code only a few times over the years. Always in critical situations, requiring immediate attention. Mary appeared on the porch before the truck even came to a complete stop, her nurse's experience allowing her to assess the gravity of the situation in a single glance. "My goodness," she murmured, running to help her husband. "Severe dehydration, possible heart problems, injuries to her hands and wrists," John reported quickly as they carried Hope inside. "Mary, someone tied this woman up in the middle of the desert and left her there." Mary's face hardened with a determination John knew well. His wife could be as gentle as a flower, but when it came to caring for people in need, she transformed into a force of nature. Mary Helen moved through the house with the efficiency of an experienced professional, transforming the guest room into a makeshift intensive care unit. Her hands, toughened by years of work but still precise, checked Hope's vital signs, while John watched anxiously. "Irregular pulse, low blood pressure, severe dehydration," Mary murmured to herself, applying cold compresses to the patient's forehead. "John, I need you to go to the town pharmacy and get saline solution, heart medication, and special bandages. Take this list." Hope slowly opened her eyes, meeting Mary's compassionate gaze. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice still weak but clearer than before. "You're safe, dear," Mary replied tenderly, holding her hand. "I'm Mary Helen, a nurse. My husband John brought you here. You're in our home, and we're going to take very good care of you." Tears began to stream down Hope's face. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Mary's heart ached. "Because that's what decent people do, dear. We take care of each other. Now tell me, what's your name?" Hope, she replied, a faint smile blooming on her parched lips. Hope Santos. What an ironic name for someone who had lost all hope until you found me. While Mary tended to her injuries, Hope began to tell her story. She spoke of Robert, how she had raised him alone after her husband's premature death, all the sacrifices she had made to give him a quality education. Every word was loaded with deep pain, but also with an unwavering love, despite everything. I sold our family home to pay for his college, she recounted, allowing Mary to gently clean the wounds on her wrists. I worked 2, sometimes 3, jobs a day so he wouldn't have to worry about money. When he graduated in business administration, I thought we could finally have a more peaceful life together. Mary shook her head, indignant. And he became a businessman. Yes, very successful. But the richer he got, the more distant he became. He started to be ashamed of me, of my simple clothes, of my way of speaking. He said I didn't fit into his world. John returned from the pharmacy at that moment, carrying bags full of medication and medical supplies. How is she? He asked, concerned. Better, but we still need to monitor her closely, Mary replied, preparing a rehydration solution. Mrs. Santos was telling me about her son. John's face hardened. What kind of man abandons his own mother in the desert? You don't even do that to an enemy. Hope sighed deeply. Yesterday morning, I called him asking for help to buy my heart medication. The doctor said it was a matter of life or death. Robert got furious, said I was hurting his business image. His business image, Mary repeated, incredulous. He said his partners commented on his expenses with me, that it made him look weak, that it was time for me to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. Hope closed her eyes, the pain of the memory still very vivid. Then he came to pick me up, said we were going for a drive. When we stopped at that tree, her voice faltered, and Mary held her hand more tightly. You don't need to continue now, dear. The important thing is that you're here, safe with us. John paced back and forth in the room, his indignation growing. That man needs to answer for what he did. This is attempted murder, abandonment of a vulnerable person, elder abuse. No, please, Hope pleaded, alarmed. He's my son. I don't want to cause trouble for him. Maybe he just needs time to reflect, to remember who he really is. Mary and John exchanged worried glances. They recognized a mother's unconditional love, but they also knew that Robert needed to face the consequences of his actions. However, they respected Hope's wish, at least for now. Very well, Mary said softly. For now, let's focus on your recovery. John and I will take care of you for as long as needed. Consider yourself our special guest. Hope began to cry again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. You are angels, true angels, God put in my path. Storm appeared at the window at that moment, as if checking on his protected friend. Hope smiled when she saw him. And you too, my brave guardian, I'll never forget how you protected me. The horse whinnied softly, as if understanding every word, before moving off to graze peacefully in the yard, always keeping the house in its line of sight. Over the next 3 days, John and Mary's small ranch transformed into a true home for Hope. Under the attentive care of the retired nurse, she gradually regained her strength. Her wounds healed, and for the first time in months, she was able to take her heart medication regularly. How are you feeling today, dear? Mary asked, serving breakfast on the porch where Hope liked to sit and watch Storm graze in the yard. Like I've been reborn, Hope replied, a genuine smile lighting up her face, still marked by the desert ordeal. It's been so long since I felt part of a real family. John approached, bringing fresh eggs from the chicken coop. You're part of our family now, he said simply. Mary and I never had children, but God sent us a wonderful mother. The words touched Hope's heart deeply. She looked at the simple couple who had worked their entire lives to build a modest but love-filled home, and felt a gratitude she could never fully express in words. It was on that quiet morning that the phone rang, breaking the peace of the home. John answered with his usual warm voice. but his expression quickly changed to one of concern, then indignation. "Hello. Yes, this is John Riley. What do you mean, a kidnapping? What are you talking about?" His voice rose, alerting Mary and Hope. On the other end of the line, an arrogant, threatening voice identified himself as Robert Santos, a successful businessman looking for his senile mother who had been kidnapped by an opportunistic rancher interested in extorting money from the family. "Listen closely. You country bumpkin." Robert's voice cut through the phone with pure venom. "I know you have my mother. She suffers from severe mental problems and cannot make decisions for herself. I demand you return her immediately. Otherwise, you will face severe legal consequences." John looked at Hope, who had paled upon hearing the aggressive tone she recognized so well. Her hands began to tremble, and Mary immediately stood by her side to offer support. "Mr. Santos," John replied firmly, "your mother is here because we found her tied up in the middle of the desert, abandoned to die. She is recovering from severe injuries and severe dehydration." "Lies!" Robert shouted. "My mother is a problematic woman who invents stories for attention. She ran away from home, and you are taking advantage of her mental confusion to extort money." John's indignation grew. "We don't want any money. We just want your mother to be safe and healthy. I know your type." Robert's voice dripped with contempt. "Simple folks who see an opportunity to take advantage of a rich family, but you don't know who you're dealing with. I have contacts everywhere, police, judges, prosecutors. I can destroy your insignificant lives with a few calls." Hope tremblingly stood up and gestured for John to hand her the phone. With shaky hands but a firm voice, she spoke. "Robert, it's me. Please stop this. These people saved my life." "Mom, you are obviously confused and manipulated," Robert replied without showing any affection. "I've prepared a room at a specialized clinic where you will receive proper treatment for your mental condition. I'll be there this afternoon with an ambulance and legal documentation to pick you up." "I'm not going," Hope responded with a firmness that surprised everyone, including herself. "If for the first time in years I'm being treated with dignity and respect, I will not allow you to commit me to a clinic against my will." The silence on the other end of the line lasted a few tense seconds. When Robert spoke again, his voice was filled with a coldness that made everyone shiver. "Very well. If that's how you want to play, Mother, then so be it. But know that these saviors of yours will regret getting involved in matters that are none of their business. I have enough resources and influence to make your lives a living hell." The call ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Hope collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "Forgive me," she murmured. "I've brought trouble to you. Maybe it's best if I leave before he carries out his threats." "Don't you dare think that," Mary said firmly, sitting beside her. "You're not going anywhere. If that son of yours wants a war, then let him come. John and I don't bow to bullies." John nodded with determination. "Mary's right. No one is taking you out of here against your will. And if that Robert comes with threats, he'll find that out here in the country. We also have our rights and our dignity." Storm appeared at the window at that moment, as if sensing the tension in the air. His intelligent eyes observed each worried face, and he let out a low whinny that sounded almost like a promise of protection. The following afternoon, 3 official vehicles pulled up in front of John and Mary's ranch, raising a cloud of dust that seemed to symbolize the approaching storm. Robert stepped out of a gleaming BMW, accompanied by 2 men in suits who clearly didn't belong in that rural setting, and an ambulance with paramedics waited outside. "Good afternoon," Robert said with false cordiality, adjusting his expensive tie. "I've come to pick up my mother. I've brought all the necessary documentation and medical professionals to ensure she is safely transported." John emerged from the house standing tall, Mary by his side and Hope just behind, visibly apprehensive but determined. "Your mother has made it clear she doesn't want to go with you," the rancher replied firmly. "My mother suffers from senile dementia and is not capable of making decisions about her own life," Robert responded, pulling papers from a leather brief. I have here a temporary court order granting me emergency medical guardianship based on psychiatric reports proving her mental incapacity. Hope stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. I don't have dementia, Robert. You know that very well. I'm completely lucid and I know exactly what you did to me. See, Robert said to the men accompanying him, she has persecutory delusions. She believes fantasies about being abandoned in the desert. It's a classic symptom of her condition. It was at this moment that something completely unexpected happened. An old but well-maintained pickup truck pulled up at the property entrance, and from it stepped a middle-aged woman wearing simple clothes but carrying a professional camera and a digital recorder. "Excuse the interruption," she said, approaching the group. "I'm Carla Evans, an investigative journalist for the Regional Gazette. We received an anonymous tip about a case of elder abandonment that supposedly occurred in this area." Robert's face instantly paled. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is a private family medical matter." "Interesting," Carla replied, turning on her recorder, "because according to our source, a businessman from the city abandoned his elderly mother tied up in the middle of the desert and is now trying to silence the people who saved her." "This is absurd," Robert exploded, losing his carefully constructed composure. "Who made such a ridiculous accusation?" Carla smiled. Let's just say someone with 4 legs and a clear conscience led us to the truth." She looked directly at Storm, who was attentively watching the scene from the other side of the yard. The journalist continued, "We visited the location where your mother was found. We discovered blood-stained ropes, footprints matching your shoes, Mr. Santos, and tire marks that match your vehicle. We also found this." She pulled an object from her bag, a golden button with the initials RS engraved. "It must have fallen off your shirt during the struggle to tie up your mother, I presume." Robert recoiled, his hands trembling. "You can't prove anything. I have the best lawyers in the state." "Perhaps," Carla agreed, "but we also have something more powerful than lawyers, the truth. And the truth has a funny way of always coming out." At that moment, 2 more vehicles arrived. From the first, 3 elderly residents from the area stepped out, people John and Mary knew well. From the second, a young man in jeans emerged, carrying filming equipment. "Mrs. Carmen," one of the elderly women, Mrs. Carmen, 80 years old, cried out, "Thank God you're well," when we heard what happened. "How did you know?" Mary asked, surprised. The news spread fast. 75-year-old Mr. Anthony replied, "And then it gave us the courage to tell our own stories." The cameraman began filming as Carla asked questions. "Do you know of other similar cases?" "My own grandson left me in a terrible nursing home and never showed up again," Mrs. Carmen recounted. "When I complain, he says I'm a nagging old woman who doesn't understand anything. My daughter sold my house and put me in a small room in the back of her property," Mr. Anthony added. "She says it's for my own good. But I know she's ashamed to have a father who isn't educated." Robert watched his world crumble before his eyes. "Stop it. You don't know anything about my situation." "We know enough," Hope said, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. "We know you tied me to that tree and left me to die because I asked for help to buy medication. We know you're ashamed of me because I don't fit into your world of appearances." The camera captured every word, every expression of embarrassment on Robert's face. Carla asked a few more penetrating questions, and when Robert tried to leave, she calmly said, "I don't recommend you leave the area, Mr. Santos. I believe the competent authorities will want to speak with you very soon." Robert furiously got into his car, followed by the men in suits, leaving behind only the echo of his empty threats and the certainty that his life of privilege, built on lies, was coming to an end. In the days that followed the confrontation with Robert, John and Mary's small ranch transformed into the center of an unprecedented community mobilization. Carla Evans' report had deeply touched the region's conscience, and people of all ages began to appear, offering support and sharing their own experiences. "I've never seen anything like it," Mary commented, watching the constant movement in the yard from the kitchen window. It's as if Mrs. Santos's story awakened something dormant in people's hearts. Hope, now completely recovered physically and gaining emotional strength every day, became a central figure in this network of solidarity. Sitting on the porch, she received daily visits from other elderly individuals who came seeking comfort and sharing their pains. "My daughter treats me like a burden," confessed 78-year-old Mrs. Rose, drying tears with an embroidered handkerchief. "Oh, she says I should be grateful to have a roof over my head, even if it's just a converted garage." Hope held her hands tenderly. "Dear, you are not a burden. You are a person with rights, with dignity. You deserve respect and love, not forced gratitude." John observed these conversations with growing concern and admiration. Concern because he perceived the magnitude of the problem being revealed. Admiration for the wisdom and strength Hope demonstrated in welcoming others in similar situations. "Do you know what hurts me the most?" Mrs. Rose continued. "It's that I raised this daughter with so much love, sacrificed my youth for her, and now she acts as if I'm a nuisance who appeared out of nowhere in her life." "I understand perfectly," Hope replied, her voice filled with deep comprehension. "I also wonder where I went wrong, what values I failed to teach. But I'm learning that sometimes the problem isn't in what we did or didn't do. Sometimes people simply choose to forget where they came from." Carla Evans returned regularly to document these stories. Her initial investigation into Hope's case had transformed into a special series on abandonment and neglect against the elderly in the region. With each interview, more cases came to light. "Mr. Anthony," she asked during one of the recordings, "and how do you feel seeing that you're not alone in this situation?" The 75-year-old man, who had arrived shy and ashamed on his first visit, now spoke with conviction, relieved. "I thought it was my fault, that I had been a bad father. But seeing other people going through the same thing, I understand that this is a bigger problem than us." Storm had become a kind of unofficial mascot for this movement. The horse seemed to intuitively understand when someone arrived in a fragile emotional state, delicately approaching to offer its comforting presence. Several people commented on how the animal's mere presence made them feel better. "It's like he knows exactly what we're going through," Mrs. Carmen said, stroking the white muzzle as she told her story to the camera. Meanwhile, John and Mary worked tirelessly to logistically support this spontaneous movement. Mary used her nursing knowledge to advise on basic health care, while John organized practical resources and transportation for those who needed it. "Mary," John said one night, when they were finally alone, "I think we're experiencing something historic. This mobilization could change many lives." "I agree," she replied, tired but satisfied, "and it all started with Storm bringing you to that tree. Sometimes I think there's a greater purpose in all of this." Robert's influence, however, still made itself felt. Threatening calls came regularly, intimidating lawyers appeared trying to discourage witnesses, and malicious rumors about the exploitation of the elderly circulated among influential people in the region. "He's trying to discredit you," Carla observed during one of her visits. "He's spread the word that you're taking advantage of these people's vulnerability to gain fame and money." Hope was indignant. "What money? John and Mary spent their own savings buying medication for me and for others who came here. They gave food, shelter, care, without asking for anything in return." "I know that," Carla assured, "and I'll make that very clear in the next report. But you need to be prepared. Robert won't give up easily. Men like him don't accept losing control without a fight." That night, as Hope helped Mary in the kitchen preparing dinner for the several visitors who had stayed late, she reflected on how her life had completely changed in such a short time. "Mary," she said softly, "for the first time in decades, I feel like my life has purpose again. I'm not just a useless old woman waiting to die. I'm someone who can help other people find their dignity." Mary smiled. hugging the woman she already considered a sister. "You always had purpose, dear. You just needed people who knew how to see your worth." The escalation of pressure became evident when John was approached by two men in suits at the small-town grocery store, where he did his weekly shopping. They identified themselves as Robert's legal consultants and made it clear, without direct threats, but with heavy insinuations, that the situation needed to be resolved quickly. Mr. Riley, one of them, a thin man with dark glasses, said, "You seem to be a sensible person. You certainly understand that you are getting involved in matters that could bring unpleasant consequences for your family." John stood firm, though he felt his heart racing. "I'm not getting involved in anything other than caring for someone who needed help." Of course," replied the second, stockier man with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But sometimes our good intentions can be misinterpreted by the authorities. Problems with property documentation, environmental licenses, tax issues. These things can pop up when we least expect them." The veiled threat was clear. John knew Robert was using his influence to create bureaucratic problems that could cost them the ranch he and Mary had built with decades of hard work. When he arrived home, he found Mary comforting Hope, who was crying silently on the porch. "What happened?" he asked, concerned. "Robert called," Mary explained, her voice tense. "He said terrible things to her. He threatened to sue all of us for kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy. He said he would prove that we are manipulating an elderly woman with mental problems for our own benefit." Hope raised her tear-streaked face. "John, Mary, I can't let you suffer because of me anymore. Maybe it's best if I go back with him and end all of this." "Don't you dare think that," John said firmly, sitting beside her. "This man is trying to scare us because he knows he's wrong. If we give up now, he'll keep doing this to other people." At that moment, Carla Evans arrived with news that completely changed the course of the conversation. "I have important news," she said, pulling a folder full of documents from her bag. "And my investigation into Robert has revealed some very interesting things." She spread papers on the porch table. "I discovered that Robert isn't just cruel to his mother. There's a pattern of abusive behavior in his businesses too. Elderly employees who were fired without cause, small suppliers who were cheated on contracts, a charity foundation he manages where funds mysteriously disappear." "That means that," Mary began. "It means we're dealing with someone who makes abuse of power a lifestyle," Carla finished. "And there's more. I talked to former employees of his company. Several people are willing to testify about questionable practices, but they were afraid to expose themselves alone." Hope listened to everything with growing surprise and pain. "I raised a monster," she murmured. "Where did so much cruelty come from?" "Dear," Mary said gently, "sometimes people choose a path that has nothing to do with how they were raised. John and I have seen that many times throughout our lives." John reflected for a moment. "Carla, are these people willing to speak publicly?" "Some yes. Others are still afraid of retaliation. But if we can show that Robert isn't as powerful as he seems, if we can demonstrate that he can be held accountable for his actions, I believe more witnesses will come forward." That afternoon, more elderly people arrived at the ranch, but this time bringing something different, their adult children. These were people who had watched Carla's reports and recognized problematic behaviors in their own families. "I came to apologize," said a 40-year-old woman, accompanied by her 70-year-old mother. "I watched the report and recognized myself in the attitudes that were described. I've been treating my mother like a burden, not a person." "Me too," confessed a middle-aged man. "I always thought I was doing my father a favor by taking care of him. I never realized he has rights, that he deserves respect, not just tolerance." Hope was deeply moved to witness these reconciliations. "Look at that," she said to John and Mary. "Something good is coming out of all this suffering. Families are reconnecting." Storm observed everything from his usual position near the porch, like a silent guardian. Several people commented on how the horse's presence seemed to bring peace to the most tense moments. That night, as the improvised family gathered for dinner, The phone rang again. This time, it was a lawyer representing Robert with an unexpected proposal. "My client is willing to make a deal," said the cold voice on the other end of the line. "Generous financial compensation for all involved in exchange for silence about this family misunderstanding." John looked at Hope, who shook her head decisively. "Tell your client," John replied, "that we're not interested in money. We're interested in justice and the protection of people who cannot defend themselves." After hanging up, Mary commented, "He's getting desperate. When people like Robert offer money, it's because they know they've lost control of the situation." The morning brought a surprise no one expected. An official car pulled up in front of the ranch, and from it stepped an elegant, middle-aged woman in a discreet suit. She identified herself as Dr. Helen Miller, a district attorney specializing in elder abuse crimes. "I'm here," she said directly, "because journalist Carla Evans' reports have drawn our attention to a case that may represent serious human rights violations. I need to hear testimony from Mrs. Santos and all involved witnesses." Hope felt a mix of relief and nervousness. Finally, the competent authorities were getting involved, but this also meant she would have to publicly relive the most painful moments of her life. "Doctor," John asked, "does this mean Robert can actually be held accountable for what he did? If we can prove abandonment of a vulnerable person, elder abuse, and possibly other related crimes, yes," the prosecutor replied, "but we need solid testimonies and consistent evidence." For the next 2 hours, Hope told her story with details she had tried to forget. She described every moment of the abandonment in the desert, every cruel word from Robert, every second of despair under the scorching sun. Her hands trembled, but her voice remained firm. "Mrs. Santos," the prosecutor asked gently, "are you absolutely certain that it was your son Robert who took you to that tree and tied you there?" "I am certain," she replied, looking directly into Dr. Helen's eyes. "I would recognize those hands and that voice anywhere in the world. They were the same hands I held when he took his first steps, the same voice that once lovingly called me Mom." John and Mary also gave their testimonies, describing the state in which they found Hope and all the evidence from the scene. Storm remained near the window, as if understanding the importance of that moment. The prosecutor then asked a question that surprised everyone. "Would you like me to call for a public hearing? It's an unusual procedure, but considering the social impact of this case and the number of people involved, I believe it would be beneficial for the community." "What would that mean?" Mary asked. "It would mean that Robert would have to publicly face the accusations before the entire community that was affected by his actions. Other victims of similar situations could also testify, creating an important precedent for future cases." Hope reflected for a long moment. The idea of confronting Robert publicly terrified her, but it also strengthened her. "Yes," she finally said. "I want him to look me in the eye and try to explain his actions before everyone." That afternoon, the news of the public hearing spread quickly through the region. Carla Evans published a special article explaining the procedure and calling for other victims of family neglect to come forward. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of elderly people from the region and neighboring towns contacted them, wanting to participate. Remorseful family members also came forward, wanting to support the movement for greater protection of elder rights. "I've never seen anything like this," the prosecutor commented during a call to John. "This case is becoming a landmark in the fight for elder rights in our region." The hearing will be broadcast live, and several other counties have already expressed interest in similar procedures. Robert, meanwhile, intensified his intimidation attempts. He hired a private investigation firm to dig into John and Mary's lives, looking for any irregularities he could use against them. He also spread rumors that the public hearing was a staged event and that his mother was being manipulated by people interested in fame. "He's desperate," Carla observed during a visit. He hired a PR firm to try and control the narrative, but the evidence is very solid. The button with his initials found at the scene, the footprints, Mrs. Santos's injuries, everything points to him. On the eve of the hearing, Hope spent the night awake, reflecting on her journey. From a woman abandoned in the desert, she had become the voice of dozens of elderly people suffering in silence. The pain of her son's rejection remained, but it had been transformed into purpose. "Mary," she said as they had tea in the kitchen, "for the first time in decades, I feel like my life has purpose again. I'm not just a useless old woman waiting to die. I'm someone who can help other people find their dignity." "Dear," Mary replied with tears in her eyes, "you always had worth. You just needed people who knew how to see it." Outside, Storm grazed peacefully under the stars, like a silent guardian watching over the dreams of justice that finally seemed possible. The next morning, as they prepared to leave for the hearing, John found something surprising: recent footprints belonging to Robert around the property, as if he had been there during the night, observing the house where his mother had found the family he had never been able to give her. The county courthouse auditorium was packed as never before in the small town's history. More than 200 people squeezed onto benches, in hallways, and even outside, where loudspeakers had been installed to allow everyone to follow the historic hearing. Television cameras from several networks recorded every moment. Hope entered the room supported by John and Mary, her posture erect despite her nerves. She wore a simple but dignified dress, carefully chosen by Mary for the occasion. A respectful murmur spread through the crowd as she passed, many people rising in a show of solidarity. On the other side of the auditorium, Robert sat with a team of 5 expensive lawyers, all impeccably dressed. His face maintained an expression of calculated disdain, but his eyes revealed nervousness. When Hope entered, he quickly glanced her way, then averted his gaze as if he didn't recognize her. "This is an extraordinary hearing," District Attorney Helen Miller began, "convened to address a case that transcends private family matters and touches on fundamental social problems. The abandonment, neglect, and abuse of elderly individuals in our society." The first to testify was John, who recounted with touching simplicity how he found Hope tied to the tree. "Your Honor," he said, "in 40 years living in the country, I've never seen cruelty like that. The woman was being consumed by the sun, her hands wounded by the ropes, practically unconscious." Mary testified about Hope's medical state when she arrived at her home. Severe dehydration, injuries that indicated a struggle, signs that she had spent hours without protection against the extreme heat. "If my husband hadn't found her when he did, she would have died." When it was Hope's turn to testify, an absolute silence fell over the auditorium. She walked to the microphone with slow but determined steps, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice emerged clear and strong. "My name is Hope Santos. I am 75 years old, and I was abandoned in the desert to die by my own son, Robert Santos, that man right there." She pointed directly at him, who tried to maintain his composure but clearly flinched in his chair. "I raised Robert alone after my husband died," she continued. "I sold our family home to pay for his studies. I worked 3 jobs a day so he wouldn't lack for anything. I gave up all my opportunities for happiness to ensure he had a future. And when I finally needed his help, when my health deteriorated and I could no longer afford my heart medication, he told me I was a burden, an embarrassment to his business image." Tears rolled down the faces of many people in the audience. Robert shifted restlessly in his chair, occasionally whispering something to his lawyers. "On the day he took me to the desert," Hope continued, her voice now filled with pain but also determination, "and he told me, 'That's for you to learn not to bother me with your pathetic needs again.' Those were the last words my son spoke to me before tying me to that tree and abandoning me to die." One of Robert's lawyers stood to object, but the judge made him sit down. clearly touched by the testimony. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Hope addressed the 12 people who would decide Robert's fate directly. I am not here for revenge. I am here because I discovered that I am not the only mother, the only father, the only elderly person who suffers this kind of abandonment. I'm here so that other families do not go through this, so that children remember that their parents are also human beings with rights and dignity. When Robert was finally called to testify, his initial arrogance had given way to clear defensiveness. My mother suffers from mental problems, he began, but his voice sounded forced. And she invents stories. She has persecutory delusions. I would never do something like what she is alleging. Mr. Santos, the district attorney interrupted, how do you explain the button with your initials found at the site where your mother was tied up? How do you explain the footprints that match your shoes? How do you explain the injuries on her hands that are consistent with tight ropes? Robert hesitated, his lawyers urgently whispering in his ear. That could have several explanations. Maybe she kept that button, maybe... Mr. Santos, the district attorney continued relentlessly. Do you have any medical certificate proving that your mother suffers from dementia or any other condition that compromises her lucidity? Another awkward silence. I don't have it with me, but because we have here, the district attorney said, displaying documents. Recent neurological and psychiatric examinations performed by independent professionals who attest that Mrs. Hope Santos is in full possession of her mental faculties. At that moment, something happened that no one expected. Robert looked directly at Hope for the first time since the hearing began, and for a few seconds his mask of a successful businessman completely crumbled. In his eyes, everyone could see not only fear of the legal consequences, but something deeper, the belated realization of what he had truly done. The moment of maximum tension came when District Attorney Helen presented her final accusation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said, walking slowly before the jury, this is not just a case of abandonment. It is a case about what we become as a society when we allow money and status to become more important than fundamental human bonds. Robert was visibly shaken, his hands trembling as his lawyers tried to whisper instructions in his ear. But something had changed in him since he looked into his mother's eyes. Arrogance had given way to deep confusion, as if he was seeing his own life through different lenses for the first time. I would like, the district attorney said, to call one last witness. Someone who has known Robert Santos for a long time and can give us a unique perspective on the man he has become. To everyone's surprise, including Robert's lawyers, she called Mr. Charles Miller, former partner of the defendant's company. A man of 50, dressed simply but with dignity, walked to the microphone. Robert paled at the sight of him. Charles, no, he murmured, but was silenced by one of his lawyers. Mr. Miller, the district attorney asked, how long have you known Robert Santos? 15 years. We were partners for 8 years, until I discovered things I could no longer tolerate, Charles replied, his voice firm but filled with sadness. What kind of things? Charles looked directly at Robert before answering. Robert had a habit of getting rid of employees when they became inconvenient. He would fire people close to retirement to avoid paying full benefits. When I questioned this, he said that sentimentality doesn't generate profit. A murmur ran through the auditorium. Robert tried to stand up, but was restrained by his lawyers. There was a specific case, Charles continued, of a 68-year-old man who had worked at the company for 30 years. When he needed to take time off due to health problems, Robert not only fired him, but also spread rumors to prevent him from getting work at other companies. When I questioned Robert about this, he said, old people are dead weight. It's better to get rid of them before they become a bigger problem. Hope covered her face with her hands, not out of shame for her son, but from deep pain as she realized how he had transformed into someone completely different from the boy she had raised. That's why I ended our partnership, Charles concluded. I could no longer be associated with someone capable of such coldly calculated cruelty. Robert finally exploded. Enough! You don't understand anything. You don't know what it's like to maintain an image, to constantly prove you're worthy of respect. My mother, she embarrassed me. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. Robert continued, his words spilling out uncontrollably, as if a dam had broken. Do you think it's easy? Growing up as the seamstress's son, having partners who comment on your unnecessary expenses, with family, I built an empire. I became someone important, and she always reminded me where I came from. Hope slowly stood, her legs trembling but her voice firm. Robert, I was always proud of where you came from. I was proud of every penny I earned with honest work to give you opportunities. The question isn't where you came from, my son. The question is what you have become. For the first time in the hearing, Robert looked directly at her, and his defenses completely collapsed. Tears began to roll down his face as he finally saw what he had done. "Mom," he whispered, his voice broken. I didn't want to. It wasn't supposed to be like this." "But it was," Hope replied, her own voice choked but resolute. "You chose, Robert. You chose money over love, image over family, power over humanity, and it almost cost me my life." The judge, an experienced man who had witnessed many cases throughout his career, was visibly moved. "Rarely," he said, "have I witnessed such a clear demonstration of human dignity and wisdom as what we have just seen." Turning then to Robert, his voice became solemn. "Mr. Robert Santos, this court finds you guilty of abandonment of a vulnerable person, elder abuse, and attempted coercion. Considering the gravity of the crimes and their social impact, I sentence you to 2 years in prison, which may be served under a supervised parole program if you demonstrate genuine behavioral change." The auditorium remained silent, absorbing the weight of the decision. "In addition," the judge continued, "I order that 50% of the defendant's assets be allocated to the creation of an elder protection fund in the region, administered by an independent commission. The remainder of his assets will be preserved, allowing that, should he demonstrate true transformation, he may rebuild his life with dignity." Robert nodded, accepting the sentence without protest. His lawyers seemed to want to object, but he silenced them with a gesture. "There is something else I would like to say." Robert asked the judge for permission, who assented. He turned again to Hope. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but would it be possible, during these 2 years, would it be possible to receive your letters? I'm not asking for visits. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. Just a chance to show that I can remember who you taught me to be." Hope exchanged a look with John and Mary, who nodded encouragingly. "We can talk about that, Robert, but know that any future relationship between us will depend on you proving, through actions, that you have truly changed." In the months that followed the hearing, profound changes swept through the region. The fund created with Robert's assets financed the construction of 3 elder support centers, awareness programs on elder rights, and a hotline for reporting cases of abandonment and abuse. Hope became a respected figure, not only as a victim who found justice, but as an active advocate for elder rights. She traveled the region giving talks, always accompanied by John and Mary, sharing her experience and encouraging others to report abusive situations. "I never imagined," she said during one of these talks, "that my greatest pain would turn into my greatest purpose." Sometimes, the Lord allows us to go through the darkest valley so that we can guide others towards the light. John and Mary's ranch informally transformed into a temporary shelter for vulnerable elderly individuals. Mary applied her nursing knowledge, John offered therapeutic work with the land and animals, and Hope provided the emotional support that only someone who had experienced similar situations could offer. Storm, the horse who initiated this entire chain of saving events, became a kind of local symbol. Children from schools in the area visited the ranch to hear the story of the hero horse, and many people commented on how his presence brought peace and healing to difficult situations. Robert, serving his sentence under community supervision, began volunteering at a homeless shelter. His letters to Hope, initially hesitant and full of self-pity, gradually evolved into profound reflections on responsibility, humanity, and the true meaning of success. "I am learning," he wrote in one of his letters, "that building an empire means nothing if you lose your soul in the process. I'm trying to find the man you tried to teach me to be, Mom. It's a long road, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm heading in the right direction." Hope carefully kept these letters, occasionally sharing excerpts with John and Mary. "There is hope," she would say, with a smile that lit up her time-worn face. "That there is always hope when a person genuinely decides to change." 6 months after the hearing that changed so many lives, Hope woke on a sunny Saturday morning with a sense of completeness she hadn't experienced in a long time. At 76, she had discovered that life still held wonderful surprises for those who kept their hearts open to kindness. John and Mary's small ranch had transformed into a true sanctuary. What began as an emergency rescue had evolved into something much larger, a permanent home where 3 generous souls created a chosen family based on unconditional love and mutual care. "Good morning, my dear," Mary greeted, serving breakfast on the porch where Hope liked to sit and quietly watch Storm graze. "How do you feel today?" "Like a blessed woman," Hope replied, smiling as she watched the activity in the yard. 3 elderly individuals who had arrived the previous week for a temporary stay helped John tend the garden, their laughter mixing with the birdsong in a symphony of simple joy. On the porch table, a stack of letters awaited reply. These were messages from people across the country who had heard her story and wanted to share their own experiences or ask for advice. Hope had become a dedicated correspondent, offering words of encouragement to those who needed it most. And another letter from Robert came, Mary said delicately, handing her a familiar envelope. Hope opened it carefully. In recent months, her son's letters had evolved dramatically. The first ones were full of self-pity and attempts to justify his actions. Gradually, however, they became genuine reflections on change, responsibility, and the search for redemption. "Dear Mom," the most recent letter read, "Today I completed 6 months of volunteering at the shelter. I met an 80-year-old man named Frank who reminded me a lot of Mr. Riley. The same simple kindness, the same silent dignity. Talking to him, I finally understood what you tried to teach me about true human value. I'm attaching photos of the garden I helped plant here. I thought you'd like to see that these hands that once caused so much suffering are now learning to cultivate life and hope." Hope smiled, carefully storing the letter with the others. "There's real progress," she commented to Mary. "His words are no longer about him, but about what he's learning from others." That afternoon, the family received a special visit. Carla Evans was accompanied by a documentary film crew producing a film about social transformation through individual stories. Hope's story would be the central focus of the documentary. "Mrs. Santos," the director asked, "if you could send a message to all the people who will watch this documentary, what would you say?" Hope reflected for a moment, gently stroking Storm's muzzle, who had approached as he always did when he sensed important moments. "I would say that human dignity has no age, that true love doesn't diminish with wrinkles or grey hair, and that sometimes our greatest pains become our greatest purposes." She looked directly at the camera, her voice gaining strength. "I would tell the children watching, your parents are not burdens, they are living treasures of wisdom and love, and to parents who feel abandoned, you have worth, you have rights, and always there are people willing to see your light when it seems to have gone out." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with golden hues that mirrored the peace in her heart, Hope walked to the tree they had planted in the yard, a sapling brought from the very spot where she had been abandoned, but now growing strong and healthy in fertile, loving soil. "You know what I've learned, Storm," she said to the horse who faithfully accompanied her. "I've learned that sometimes we need to be completely broken to discover our true strength. We need to lose everything to discover what truly matters." John and Mary joined her under the tree, forming a circle of silent gratitude. There they were, a woman who had survived the cruelest abandonment and become a voice of hope for thousands. A couple who had transformed their simple homestead into a beacon of compassion, and an extraordinary horse who had proven that kindness exists in the most unexpected forms. "Thank you," Hope whispered, looking at the starry sky that began to appear. "Thank you for transforming my desert into a garden, my abandonment into purpose, my pain into healing for others." Storm whinnied softly, as if responding that there had always been a greater plan in motion, guided by invisible hands that weave miracles through human kindness. That night, as the family gathered for dinner, one last surprise arrived, an official letter informing them that Hope's story had inspired the creation of a state law for elder protection, which would bear her name and ensure broader rights for vulnerable individuals. "Look at this," John said, showing the document. "You've become part of our state's official history." Hope smiled, but her gaze went to the window, where Storm grazed under the moonlight. "The real story," she said, "isn't in official documents. It's in the hearts that were touched, in the lives that were changed, in the people who learned to see value in one another." And so, under the same starry sky that once witnessed her greatest despair, 3 people and an extraordinary horse continued to prove that true love never ages, that human dignity never expires, and that even in the most arid deserts of human cruelty, kindness can flourish when courageous souls decide to protect those who cannot defend themselves.